Hi, welcome back to this special commemorative edition of Destination Midway. I'm Karl Zingheim, the staff historian, and we're having a special commemorative episode today on the 46th anniversary of Operation Frequent Wind and the Midway's participation in the aerial evacuation from Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War. As we were discussing earlier, we're going to turn now in our program to the people who were directly involved in the events aboard the Midway and in Saigon in that April of 1975. And we'll begin with Courtney Herrmann, sorry.
Yes.
Courtney Herrmann, who was an 8-year-old child with her family, and you reported earlier that you had grown up outside Saigon.
No, inside Saigon.
Inside Saigon itself. What was your family doing before the events of 1975?
Well, my parents, my father was a retired officer, and he and my uncle owned a successful construction company. My mother was a stay-at-home mom tending to her 10 children, and at the time she was 5.5 months pregnant.
Oh. And so, in effect, there wasn't any future for your family should the communists take over the rest of the country?
Not at all.
So you had every motivation to try and leave as fast as possible?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, we also have Stephanie with us. Your family also grew up in the Saigon area?
Yes, I grew up in Saigon together with my parents and my sisters and my brother, total of 8 people in my family. And my dad and my mom, they both Army officers. My dad was a colonel in the Army, and my mom was the Army nurse. They migrated. They actually evacuated from North Vietnam to the south, and that's where they established their family. That's where we were born. And and we have to leave. We didn't have a choice. Especially when you associate with the military, it's kind of difficult to stay behind, and our future is so uncertain what we're going to happen to us.
Definitely. And joining us as well in the wardroom, of course, is our own Vern Jumper. And Vern, you were the air boss on board the Midway in 1975. Could you briefly describe what an air boss is on an aircraft carrier?
As the air boss, I'm in charge of the launch and recovery of all the air wing aircraft on the flight deck. I'm also in charge of the hangar deck and also in charge of 1.3 million gallons of jet fuel that we pump every day. So my job was in charge of the air department, which entailed approximately 350 men at the time. It's a very exciting job. At times, operations on an aircraft carrier are difficult and dangerous, but it was my job to try to keep it safe. And that's what I worked at on a daily basis.
Thank you. And joining us from his home in San Diego is former commanding officer of the USS Midway 1975, Admiral Larry Chambers. Admiral, are you with us today? Hello. We're just having some audio difficulties apparently, but we'll get that corrected momentarily.
We'll try again. Am I loud enough?
I can hear you now, Admiral. Basically, to introduce you, sir, believe it or not, Admiral Chambers had only been commanding officer for just a few days of the Midway when the sudden word came out that the Midway was going to be the centerpiece for a special evacuation operation. So, Admiral, what were the initial expectations as to how large this evacuation was going to be when you were first alerted to it?
Actually, we had no idea. We were basically in Subic Bay, and we received the words to get underway immediately, and we offloaded every aircraft that was on the flight deck to make room for some HH-50, HH-53s, 52s, the Jolly Green guys that were mostly search and rescue. And we were to pick those guys up off the southern tip of Vietnam and then proceed to position off of Vung Tau in anticipation of a possible evacuation. and we practiced all sorts of drills. Vern was the guy that was in the spotlight. He had 10 of those big helicopters on deck, and including 3 smallers that were to be involved in the evacuation. And because of lack of spare parts, we weren't able to practice with those guys until the actual operation began. And those guys in the tower did a hell of a job for us.
Thank you, Admiral. And of course, coming back to the flight deck of the Midway, one of the things that made the evacuation different from anything Midway had done before was that a large segment of her air wing was in fact removed from the ship to make room for a couple of detachments worth of Special Air Force rescue helicopters. And Vern, what was it like having to deal with an entirely different service with their large helicopters on the flight deck?
It was outstanding. The Air Force crews and maintenance personnel from the Air Force squadrons that came aboard did an outstanding job. It was just amazing. We shuttled those H-53s between the ship and Saigon for 30 hours straight, and there was no mishap involved, and there was no mistakes made by those Air Force crews. They did an outstanding job.
And coming back to Admiral Chambers, Admiral, as the commanding officer responsible for everything going on the Midway, what was your overriding concern about how the operation was going to progress on board?
The big concern for everybody was to have a large number of civilians, some male and female. We had some relatively senior citizens as well as babes in arms, and that flight deck is a very hazardous place at any time. And to bring those big helicopters aboard, take care of the people, and move them down below, examine them medically, give them bed, and then to run them back up on the flight deck, those that we were capable of doing, and transferring those folks to the other ships in company to make room for the H-53s brought huge numbers. Hueys brought up to maybe 30, 40 people at a time, but the H-53s brought a couple hundred people at a time. So managing the personnel flow was one of the more difficult tasks. And Vern and the crew did a hell of a job, but I don't think we hurt anybody. We had a few skinned knees, hands when they fall on a flight deck with a non-skid coating on it. Great for stopping aircraft, but not real good on the hands and knees if you have to take a swim.
Definitely. And one thing to keep in mind as well, that while all these improvisations and preparations were going on, the situation in South Vietnam was deteriorating by the hour. Armed resistance had effectively ended by April 20th. We're talking an entire week before the actual evacuations themselves commenced, and President Tu had resigned and fled to exile in Taiwan by April 25th. So we'll take the scene now back to Saigon, and Courtney, although you were quite young at the time, please relate to us as best you can what was going on with your memories from the ground on Saigon before you could get aboard a helicopter.
I remembered a couple of weeks prior to the fall, watching my parents sewing like backpacks, and being a curious 8-year-old, I asked what they were for. And my mother said it was to carry your younger siblings on our backs because we are leaving the country. And so I thought to myself, I said, oh, are we going to visit, our grandparents in central Vietnam? And my father says, no. He said, we are leaving the country because the communists are taking over and we cannot live under communism. And I just thought, okay, that was it. And 2 days prior, April 28th, was when we were sleeping, and it was in the middle of the night, and I remembered just hearing bombings going off, and my parents got all of us to get out of bed, and we all just started crawling on the floor towards the door. And at the time, I was just thinking, is this what it means to leave the country? Because I was still, I guess, terrified. I didn't know what to think. And as we were leaving towards, or crawling towards the door, my uncle was outside waiting for us in a little, kind of like a minibus, and waiting for us to take us to the airport. And on the way there, I just remembered seeing, I mean, just so many people. I thought we were the only ones leaving the country. And I just remembered the saddest sight was when my uncle, okay, my mother has 9 brothers and sisters, so there's 10 in her family. And I just remembered her trying to convince my uncle to come along with us. And he said he couldn't because his family was still back home. He was just trying to make sure that we got to the airport safely. And they kept crying and crying. And I mean, it still affects me because it was just one of those things where my uncle could have had the freedom at the same time, but we weren't safe yet. And so he had left, and we went to the airport, and I just remembered seeing people with pots and pans and just whatever they can carry. I mean, it was just chaos everywhere. And we got inside, and we just waited and waited until the next instructions came from the authorities. And I think it was like the day after was when I guess the front of the airport was being bombed. And I just remembered chaos erupted again, and we all ran towards the back of the airport. And at the same time, my aunt and her 3 daughters were also with us. So there are 16 of us that's trying to escape the country, and thousands of others. And so we just sat and waited. And what happened next was that they had announced that whoever had paperwork, I guess it was in the order of employment, because 2 of my aunts had worked with the embassy, and the one that has the 3 daughters actually quit working because to raise her family, to raise her 3 daughters. And so they had the paperwork for us to, I guess, leave first. And I'm just trying to recall. There's so much going on that time. And so again, you know, people were just crying and begging, you know, no, we should go. You know, I mean, it's just like a competition to see who can get on the helicopters. And so during all this chaos, my aunt took her 3 daughters to and walked towards one of the guards at the gate and pleaded with him and said, you know, if they were to stay back, they would be killed. And so he said, okay, you know, I'll let you through. And then she said, but I also have my sister's family. And so he asked her, how many people are in your sister's family? And she said 12. And he just shook his head and said, I'm sorry, but I don't think I can pull this through because that's just too many people to let through the gate. And she kept pleading, she didn't give up. And so finally, this kind stranger gave in and said, okay, tomorrow morning, I'm gonna be stationed at this gate, and you and your sister's family, you know, come and do not enter, do not get in line, any other lines, just look for me and I'll give you a hand signal. And once I do that, then you would come to the gate. And at the time, my aunt came back and told my parents what just happened. And my mother said, you know, I mean, it's just a big risk. I mean, we can't take a chance. We still have time to turn around and go back home. And so my aunt said, we have nothing to lose. We just have to keep going. You know, if we turn around now, we're not going to have this chance anymore. And after more pleading with my parents, they decided to give it a chance. And then the next day, 7 o'clock in the morning, we went to the same guard that had talked to my aunt, and we walked through the gates.
Thank you very much. That was very heartfelt.
Thank you.
Stephanie, would you care to relate anything you recall from what was going on the ground in Saigon in those days?
As Courtney was telling her story, I kind of, in my mind, kind of rewind the whole episodes of that day. Now my dad knew that we were leaving, so we were informed, all our kids were informed the fact that we are going to be leaving, but we wasn't sure when we were going to leave. And it was very difficult because my dad was telling us that you do not communicate with your friends. And that's very difficult at 15 years old, a teenager. And you know, it's very difficult when you have some close friend that you can't tell them that, hey, I'm going to be leaving. And I never knew when I'm going to see you guys again. It was very difficult. And I remember my dad was getting ready for us. We were having like picture taken for our passport. And we travel a lot in our family. It was not the first time, but the impact of that, we did not realize it. It was a one-way trip for us at that day. And, you know, and we never knew that when we were going to be leaving either. So that was kind of a surprise for me. I remember that morning, we were sleeping, and my dad woke all of us up and said, time to go. And it was like, we were prepared a little bit. So I didn't even get a chance to even brush my teeth. So I just grabbed my bag, put on our best clothes, and head out. We all packing on my dad's car, and we drove to the rendezvous point in the city. Now, we have curfew that morning, so we left, and I was kind of worried a little bit because if we get caught, we'll be in trouble. But my dad said, let's go. So we quietly left our home, get in our car, and we drove to a rendezvous point. My dad knew exactly where to go. So we stood there for a good period of time. The city was still asleep, really quiet that morning, really quiet. And here come the convoy of buses. And I knew right away, those buses for us. And here they come, and my dad, one of the buses stopped, and my dad spoke with the bus driver, and all the buses were guarded with the soldier, American soldier, with guns. They were guarding the buses. And so my dad was talking, communicating with the bus driver and also the military, U.S. military personnel. So we got on. We got on, no problem. And when we were in the bus, my dad would make a head count. Well, my sister was missing. So that was like my older sister was missing on the bus. So we got kind of panicked and say, where is she? So then my dad talked to the bus driver and told him that we need to stop. We need to go back to where you pick us up so that way we can get my sister. And the bus driver said, it's no way. We have to continue our plan. And my dad was really begging him. And you know, we were all crying. So we can't leave without her. So the bus driver was very passionate. So he said, okay, we're going to break off the convoy. We're going to turn around. But you have 1 minute to jump off, grab her, and get right back on. Because we cannot break the whole convoy. So my dad said, okay. So the bus turned around, come back, and I saw my sister inside the bus She was crying, looking for us. And my dad got off the bus and grabbed her, got on the well. When my dad tried to get on the bus again, and the soldier came in from nowhere, and he said, "There's no way that we can let her back, my dad back on." Anyway, so we got back on finally, and we're heading out to the airport. At that time, the morning getting to be later in the day. And I noticed a lot of people out there, a lot of chaotics going on in the city. Thank you. And I noticed on the way there was just incredible people breaking in, running after our buses and begging the bus driver to stop. And at one point, I was looking around, and at one point, I noticed, I'll never forget it. I noticed it's no matter how much I try to forget, but embedded in my head, in my mind, I never forget that one Vietnamese lady was looking up at me from the outside, and she said, "Cô ơi, cô nói cái chú ngừng xe lại để tôi lên." She said, "Please ask the bus driver, let me on." There was nothing I could have done to help her. So I was so heartbroken, so torn, so I have to look away. I just couldn't look in her eyes anymore. So once we get to the airport, we went to a metal detective and go through that, and we were leading to a room to wait so we can get on our flight. As we were walking through the hallways, I noticed the office on both sides at the Dinh Airport. All the offices, like some people just went in there, just ransacked the whole entire office. And I noticed we used to have this old phone in 1975. You got this old dial roller phone. And all these red buttons were lit up and red. It just light up red, like somebody trying to get through the airport. And we keep on, the military soldiers say, "Keep going, don't stop." So we keep going, lots of us keep going to this room, and we were waiting there. You know, the room was very small, smaller than this little room here. We're all waiting there, and as we going in there, you can hear all the bombing, and the shoot, it's just so close. The whole building was just shaking. And when we was inside that room, we were sitting there, and you can feel it. You feel like, you know, I experienced my earthquake in California in 1984, 85, and it was, say, 6.2 Richter scale. You magnify that to about 100 times more than that, and you know that at the time we all like fear that we're not going to be able to get out. It was just so close, and we had very little time, and the room was very dark. And at one point, I remember the bomb would hit so hard, so close, the whole entire lighting in the room was just gone, disappear, in the pitch black room. You can hear everybody just screaming and yelling and panicking. And we have this emergency light come on in the room, and it came on, and we were told that there'd be group by group going to get out. And so my dad looked at all of us and say, "We're all going to hang on to each other," because of the experience of my sister. My dad told us to just kind of hang on to each other, grab hold of each other's hand, and never let go until we said to get out of here. So the door opened up, there's light coming in. So we ran out of there, and I remember it was so much wind, so much commotion. I was so scared. So I grabbed hold of my sister's hand and my other sister's hand, and we ran outside of that room. And all I saw was just wind and feet, and just so many feet and so much wind blowing around from the helicopter. And next thing we know, we were pushed up inside a helicopter and lift up. And the helicopter, inside the helicopter, I remember it was just so noisy and so much noise and so much turbulent. And shortly we landed on a ship. And I remember I saw the number 41. That's one number I saw, I remember that. And later on I found out it was the USS Midway, the warship. And when we get off of the helicopter, I remember that I guess the doctor on the ship was saying, open your mouth. I just followed the instructions, I opened my mouth, and I got poked. Like, who poking me? And so after I opened my mouth up, they look at my mouth and they say, go ahead and follow the line, go down to the hangar deck. I just followed my family. I don't know what the hangar deck was. We went downstairs, and then we stayed there for 2 days. We just, basically, I was just hanging out, doing nothing. And they feed us, dinner at that time. I remember I wasn't too hungry. I was wandering out to the sponson of the Midway, looking out there as Midway pulling away from our shoreline. I look at the sunset, and I realized that, I don't know. Will I ever see my country again? I don't know. Will I ever see my friends again? I don't know. As I pulling away, I just stood there. I was just wondering what my future was going to be like. You know, I wish I was younger, then I don't feel as much. As a 15-year-old teenager, you felt a lot. And the ship pulling away, I remember that night, the light, you know, the light not as bright like, now I'm a docent, the light was not as bright like we have a special event at night. It was a little dimmer. And my dad encouraged me. He said to me, you need to eat. I said, Dad, I'm really not hungry. My dad, you got to eat. We have a long journey ahead of us. You need to eat. So okay. So I went, and they were feeding me, and I remember, I guess it was like a chicken with noodles. So I guess now we got call that as a chicken casserole. I ate a little bit of that. So the next day, next morning come around, there's another thing I want to mention. Like I say again, I wish I was younger than a teenager. As a 15 years old, at the end of the year, of the month, I don't know, is that allowed to speak? Menstrual cycle is something that's very difficult for a young girl like me to handle on a ship with full of men. So I told my dad, I said, Dad, I need feminine napkin, Dad. And my dad said, well, I don't know, but I'm going to try to do this. So my dad spoke with one of the Midway crew, and he came back with 2 rags. My dad said, that's all you got, 2 rags. Do what you can. Sorry, it's a little bit too personal. So the next day, they feed us again, but I was not very hungry. So as I was walking around checking out the aircraft, all the spaces, I remember, stood there on the sponson. I remember there's a lot of cigarette boxes, a lot of cigar boxes floating in the water. And I knew that what they were. The cigar boxes, because traditionally with the Vietnamese, like people like us, we have tendency to carry out gold. We store gold in those cigarette boxes to bring with us. It was floating all over the ocean. And I remember that, like a late morning, there was a lot of screaming on the ship. And then I felt the ship slow down. And I found that man overboard. There's several Vietnamese people were jumped off the ship, going after the cigar box for that gold. And I remember the ship slowed down a little bit, because I remember the aft of the ship, there's not so much of the water propulsion from the ocean. So I remember the ship slowed down a little bit, but not exactly turn around at that time. And And I saw that man standing in the sponsor, and I saw that man, the tiny little head, tiny little picture of that figure of that human being disappearing and continue disappearing. Get to the point when no return. And I noticed the ship start to speed up a little bit. And that same morning, I also saw a lot of helicopter being pushed off the Midway flight deck. And it was an amazing sight. You've seen the huge helicopter actually went off the flight deck from the sponson where the hangar deck was. I was standing, see the helicopter fell over in the water. Quite a sight. It was amazing to see that.
We're going to take a program break at this point, so we'll reset again, and we'll rejoin you in about 30 seconds. Thank you. All right, good stuff. Welcome back, and for those of you who are just joining us, this is a commemorative edition of Destination Midway, commemorating the 46th anniversary week of Operation Frequent Wind and the Midway's participation in the evacuations from Saigon. As we're picking up the program here, we're going to turn back to Vern, who was the air boss aboard the Midway at that time. And Vern, could you, as best as you can, encapsulate the 2 days of chaos that were going on the flight deck as you were orchestrating the safe arrival of all these refugees?
It was chaos. There's no doubt of that. At one time, I counted 21 helicopters circling the ship, and we got them all aboard, and we never had radio contact with any of the helicopters. My flight deck crew performed admirably. Aviation boatswain's mate handling, AVH-1 C.J. Hurd. He was my flight deck leading petty officer, and he ran that flight deck along with Boomer Hackett and other petty officers, of course. They handled all these helicopters landing on the flight deck with purely hand signals. It was a very dangerous operation. At one time, we had to push over the side 2 Huey helicopters and a Chinook to make room for other helicopters coming aboard that were running out of fuel. It was very common. It was a very dangerous operation. If one of those helicopters would have flamed out and crashed on our flight deck with the number of people we had on the deck at any one time, many people would have died. Well, I'm here to tell you we did not lose one person. And I'm also here to tell you, and I sincerely believe this, that God was with us during those very dangerous hours. And I thank Him daily for the safety of that operation.
Thank you. Courtney, Perhaps you could get us caught up as well on your, I guess we can safe to say would be your first helicopter ride on the flight out to sea from Saigon?
Well, first of all, we were the ones that got on the Chinook, and I was terrified because so many people were trying to, like, we were all like cramped in, and I was so afraid of, you know, the Chinook, you know, crashing because of the weight, or even getting shot down by the enemy. I just didn't know what to expect because we're still in the air, and you know, we're not safe yet. And it's interesting because what Stephanie was saying, like we all have very similar stories of what we've witnessed and what we've seen. It's just families, even families that are separated from each other, and it's just young children, you know, crying, looking for their parents, or you know, just families like us as well. Stephanie's like, hold on tight, don't let go. And I remember before us getting on the helicopter, Chinook, my mother, again, was 5.5 months pregnant, and she just had all of us, you know, just hold each other's hands really tight. No matter what you do, just don't let go. And we all managed to get on the same Chinook. And miraculously, when we landed on the Midway, I mean, it was just, well, I'm going to go back a little bit. During that ride, I just remembered, you know, like the propellers, the sounds of the, I mean, it was just so loud. I mean, you can't hear anything, but it's just like you can smell the sweats, you know, like people, like, it's almost like you can feel the fear as well. But it was just so numbing because, you know, all I thought of is like, please, you know, we cannot crash. We just got to land. And so when we did land on the Midway, I just remembered, out of all that noise, I remembered hearing my mother's voice and my father, like, head counting to make sure all 16 of us were together. And we were all together. And that was like the first time that I felt really safe because, I mean, I'm actually setting foot on a ship knowing that, you know, we are leaving, we're away from the enemy now. What happens after that, you know, a few days at sea, I mean, it was just, since we were the last ones to get on the ship, so it was during nighttime and it was raining, I remembered that. So we ended up on deck. So we slept on deck, and I just remembered, you know, people just kind of claiming, I guess, their spaces, and just, I don't know which section of deck it was, but just people were just like all over and just finding spaces to you know, make their beds and tents or whatever, and it was just, it's just like a big camp out in the ocean. But it was actually nice because we got to feel the fresh ocean air instead of being below deck where there's like a lot of people and just, who knows, like, if they were sick, since we were in close quarters. I mean, we could have maybe gotten sick as well. I mean, I don't know. But we were just like really blessed.
Well, thank you for that. That's an extraordinary addition to the experiences that people have related so far about the Midway in the evacuation.
Thank you.
Turning back to Admiral Chambers, considering that this was an extraordinary 48 hours in any case, could you please relate for us the situation when a fixed-wing aircraft came out of nowhere and was attempting to communicate with the ship to convey a special message?
Well, let me see. First of all, the touching stories by Courtney and by Stephanie, it's heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching even today. And Vern has a short memory. Vern does not know the count of everything that he pushed over the side. And I want to tell you, Vern, just before we gave the ready deck for the bird dog, 8 more Hueys landed on the deck, and you asked me what to do with those. And you may not remember, but I told you that we were already going to get court-martialed, and 8 more over the side wasn't going to make any difference. And of course, you pushed those over the side too. The bird dog appeared. We were approximately 110 nautical miles at sea. It was, as one of the young ladies described, winds over the deck. The natural wind was about 15 knots, and it was light wind. And the bird dog shows up and dropped a note. It went over the side. Dropped another note. It went over the side. I think the 3rd or 4th note he dropped, he wrapped it in his pistol. It didn't have any ammo in it. And the pistol hit the crash truck and stayed on deck. But we did not need the note to know that Major Lee wanted to land. Now, unfortunately, the Admiral was yelling at me to tell the Major to ditch. We tried to communicate with the aircraft on both emergency frequency, UHF, VHF, and we had no communication. We captured one of the embassy employees and had her in the tower. She tried to communicate with the aircraft, thinking that in his excitement, he could only remember his Vietnamese. And so she tried to contact him in Vietnamese, and we had no success. So that's not a big deal. We have all the slamps, which are green, red, and so we can signal the aircraft whether to land or whether to take a wave off of what have you. So once we got the note on board, we put our glasses on it, and we thought that we could see the pilot. We could see what looks like a woman sitting in the second seat, and there was only a 2-seated airplane. She looked like she was holding a small child in her lap, and we could see one head poking out of the baggage compartment window. So we could count 4 souls on board. And with the Admiral telling me to tell him to ditch, it was obvious those folks that weren't strapped in weren't going to survive the ditching. And I put myself in the pilot's place, and I said, if I'm that guy, I'm going to land on this ship one way or the other. Either they give me permission to land, or I'm going to crash it, because that's my only chance for survival. So I told Vern to make a ready deck. Vern had some very strong words to tell me that I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I told him I was going to give him some help. I got on the ship's general announcing system and invited all air department and air wing personnel that weren't on watch to join us on the flight deck. And those are the people that are used to working up there, and that's what I thought. We'd get a few hundred people up. As it turns out, every single soul that wasn't on watch, including the junior pilots and the junior officers, showed up on the flight deck. So, Vern, I think you had a 2,000-man working party to help you clear that deck. And I know the statute of limitation is over, so they're not going to put either one of us in jail, at least at the moment. I'm 92 years old, so I know they're not going to put me in jail. And so we pushed all of that stuff over the side and made room for the pilots to land. And it was a light wind, okay for helicopters, but not for fixed wing. So chief engineer had to make some adjustments to get the old girl up to 25 knots. And with 15 knots of wind, we had somewhere around 40 knots of wind down the angle deck. So I knew we could capture this guy without a tailhook. We estimated his approach speed at 65 knots, and I probably exaggerated. It was probably a little less than that. Gave the young fellow a green Aldous lamp to come aboard and land. But just in case you know, he announced with his note that he only had an hour of fuel. He did not have enough fuel to make it back to the beach, because at that time we were about 110 nautical miles off the beach. So he was either, we were going to give him a place to land, or he was going to crash it on board. That was my thinking. And so, Vern, you don't have to worry about going to jail now for pushing all that stuff over the side. If anybody goes to jail, it's going to be me, and they're going to have to catch me. But anyway, that's basically what was going on at the time. The young fellow landed. They brought him up to the bridge, but in the middle of the chaos, I only had a few minutes with Major Lee, and I took off my wings and I pinned him on Major Lee at the time, and made him an honorary naval aviator right on the spot. And of course, then he moved on with the rest of the refugees, and we met up with the major later, but that's the story for another time. And I labeled him the bravest man I've ever met in my life. Anybody that put his whole family in an aircraft, goes out to sea without a tail hook, and thinks some idiot out there is going to clear the deck and give him a place to land. And it's just unbelievable. But he works at Disney World, and he's very private. He doesn't want to make a whole lot of noise or anything, because he still has family back in Vietnam. So he's very, very careful about any interviews or anything else that he has. But great guy. I think he's got 7 grandchildren now, and all of his children are professionals. And one's a lawyer, and when they were trying to make me a distinguished grad, he wrote one of the most beautiful letters you could imagine. But anyway, that's about as much as I can remember. But I wonder if Courtney remembers that she was a big Eminem fan. That's it.
Well, Admiral, I understand that that was not the only dust-up you had with the flag officer embarked that day. What happened when you were leaving the Gulf of Thailand on your other mission and you encountered that sinking fishing boat?
Well, how'd you find out about that? Jeez, you can't get away with anything. Well, as it turns out, we were anchored 3 miles, which was international waters. I think it's 11 or 12 miles now, but we were 3 miles off of Thailand, and a junk looked like it wanted to come alongside. I told the executive officer to go back, but you remember where we said you can't see anything with all the overhang. The XO to go back there and see what was going on, and I told him to go ahead and bring him aboard. About that time, the Admiral sent his navigator to the bridge, and he took my bridge and took around the bearings and told the Admiral that we were not in international waters, and therefore Midway had no responsibility to have anything to do with that junk. And so I called the chief engineer and told him to take the engines off of jacking gear. That's gear that keeps the engines turning over at about 2 RPM and live steam, so you can get underway quickly. And I called the First Lieutenant Jim Roper, who was a hell of a guy, and told him, man the forecastle, and we were going to veer chain. So we let out more chain, back and twisted until the whole ship was in international waters. And I told the XO after Brow to bring the people on board. The intent was to examine them medically, feed them, and send a repair team down to fix the boat so that and dewater it so that it was safe to put the people back on board. And anyway, at that time they were heavy lifting aircraft that had landed at Sadaheat Naval Air Station, Vietnamese, not Vietnam, Thailand. The Thai government said those aircraft that flew out of Vietnam and landed on my soil belong to me. Our government said no, they were on loan to the Vietnamese, and therefore the U.S. government still owned them. And so while the two governments were arguing about who owned the aircraft, an Air Force general by the name of Heine Idaho was heavy lifting these aircraft out to Midway flight deck and dropping them on the flight deck. Well, safely landing them on the flight deck. And he was bringing them, and so I didn't pay any attention to what the hell was going on with that boat at the after brow. And after about an hour or two, I called back to the XO and says, what the hell's going on back there? And the XO says, Jim Roper and the repair team, that the boat was taking on water faster than they can repair it and dewater. And I said, well, it's not my junk. Get our folks off. We don't want to lose anybody. It's not worth it. We already had 80 or so Vietnamese that we were going to drop in Guam, drop off in Guam anyway, because we felt that they weren't fully medically capable of taking the helicopter rides to the other ship. And so we cleared, and in the meantime, bringing all those other aircraft on board, we got them full, and I called the XO and told them, you know, get our people off, and the boat actually sank, so I couldn't legally put those people back over the side. And the Admiral had a few choice words to say to the captain. But that was not unusual. He'd been saying those choice words for the whole 25, 30 days I had been in command. But anyway, so we made a full power run to Guam to drop all of this stuff off. And I made an all-night transit of the San Bernardino Straits at night at full power, and that's the dumbest thing I ever did in command. And if they hadn't had a gun to my head, I never would have done it. When I got back to Japan, I saw some of those old Japanese skippers and said, World War II, you guys did that. And they looked at me and thought I was crazy and told me they weren't that stupid. But anyway, that's basically what happened. But years later, at Sun and Fun Air Show at 2014, Major Lee and I were both honored for feats in aviation. And it was there that they had a bird dog, I think it probably still belonged to the Army, and there for display. And they took a picture of the Major and all of his family. He was sitting in the cockpit. His wife did not participate in the photograph because she had a bad back. But it was there that we learned that she couldn't swim. So there was no way, and you know what, that Major was going to ditch that airplane. And of course, I found that out a huge number of years later. But anyway, that's basically the story. I've taken enough of your time, guys.
Thank you, Admiral. Now, I wish we would have even more time to go over all this material, and perhaps we could even arrange sometime to have a multi-parter. But to help conclude the narrative portion for today's session, Courtney, could you briefly relate to us your transition to your new home, your new country?
You know, the perpetual gratitude that I have towards the decision makers, Admiral Chambers, Admiral Jumper, and all these kind strangers, brave soldiers that allowed us to have the freedom so we don't have to live under the wrath of communism. I mean, it's ingrained in my heart. I mean, I don't take freedom for granted. And I'm proud to be in this country.
Thank you. And Stephanie, could you also relate your transition to your new country?
On the way to the Midway today, I thought giving an opportunity to come here to live in this great country like the United States of America. And this is the most wonderful adopted country that anybody can dream of, to be here. And I finished school, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity the country have given to me to make a good living, great education. And I'm very grateful to the fact that the USS Midway was there for my family. and of course, Vern Jumper, the air boss, and Larry Chambers, the Rear Admiral, was a great leader at that day. Without you both, wouldn't be a perfect day for us. No casualties. That was the name of the game, right? And for that, on that note, I found my first home, USS Midway, and I felt connected, and I joined the Midway as a docent, and I'm very grateful for the ships, though I volunteer.
Thank you very much. Vern, you had something.
Yes. And we're lucky to have you with us. Stephanie, thank you so much for what you do on the Midway. Another small story. We have, as a docent on the Midway, a man called Win-Win.
Yeah.
Is that Billy Bob in Vietnamese?
I think so.
Win-Win was a South Vietnamese pilot flying off the Midway in a Huey helicopter, and he made upwards of 10 round trips between the Midway and Saigon, bringing on board over 200 souls on April the 29th, 1975. And I send my greatest tribute to Win-Win. And Admiral Chambers, when you came aboard in March of 1975, I had heard that you also had been an air boss. And I thought at the time, there goes my job. But Admiral, you gave me such wonderful leadership. You helped me so much. It was just a pleasure to work for you, and I thank you so much. And it was probably the best job I had in the Navy, and you helped make it so. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vern. And I regret we will have to conclude our session today. This has been an extraordinary edition of Destination Midway, and I would personally like to thank each and every one of our panelists. Thank you as well, Courtney and Stephanie, for your heartfelt and determined recollections of what were certainly harrowing experiences in anyone's life, and we do appreciate that you were able to relate those so passionately for our audience. And of course, we are also grateful to have you with our nation now, as well as your future families coming down the line. So thank you for everything that you've done. And certainly to both Vern and Admiral Chambers, on behalf of a grateful nation as well, would like to convey our thanks for not only your participation, but also to your dedication to saving humanity and your professionalism. Extraordinarily stressful circumstances so long ago. Thank you, gentlemen, for what you did back in 1975. This concludes this episode of Destination Midway, and in addition to thanking our panelists, I'd also like to extend a special thanks to today's sponsor, San Diego's own Qualcomm, for permitting this episode to occur. If you'd like to make a donation for the USS Midway Museum, please visit our website at www.midway.org. And don't forget as well to see additional information on various topics on our Karl's Corner blog on our own social media website. And also, please follow our social media actively to learn more about future episodes of Destination Midway. And with that, I say thank you and goodbye until next time. Take care.